Hello, everyone. My name is Mina Nabavi, and I'm a program manager with the Education Core with the UAB CounterACT Research Center of Excellence in Arsenicals. Welcome to today's Grand Rounds seminar on recognizing intellectual property when you see it. For those of you not familiar with our center, it is led by Dr. Muhammad Athar, and the goal of the center is to develop mechanism-based, highly effective medical countermeasures against arsenical chemical warfare agents. For more information on the center or its activities, please visit our website at uab.edu/arsenicals or send us an email at as33@uab.edu. On the website, you will find links to recordings of past Grand Round presentations and our podcast, as well as information on future Grand Rounds as they are announced. We would like to thank our co-sponsor for today's webinar, the UAB Superfund Research Center. You can learn more about their programs and the center as a whole at the website listed on the screen. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Karthik Gopalakrishnan. He joined the Harbert Institute in 2019 at UAB and manages the commercialization efforts of UAB technologies as the Director of Licensing and New Ventures. Karthik holds more than 15 years of experience in asset and technology evaluation across broad scientific disciplines, marketing and negotiating agreements and contracts, business plan assessment, startup formation, and fundraising. He previously worked at Duke University's Office of Licensing and Ventures and as a consultant with a biotechnology startup in the oncology space, leading their strategic planning and business development efforts. Karthik earned a Master's of Science in Biotechnology from the MS University of Baroda and a Ph.D. in Biochemistry from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai. Karthik also completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and Research, Triangle Park, North Carolina. So welcome, Karthik. We're so glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much, Mina and CounterACT for the opportunity to make this presentation. As Mina mentioned, please feel free to interrupt at any time during the course of this conversation. I'd like it to be a conversation if possible, because there are several elements here which is best if you address your questions as it arises in your head, as opposed to waiting till the end. So I'm Karthik. The last name is mostly unpronounceable, so just call me Karthik. And the conversation is going to be about recognizing intellectual property when you see it. But before we go there, I thought I'll take the opportunity to kind of introduce what the institute that I work in, HII, is all about, and why we exist, what we do, and the objectives as to how HII brings value to UAB and how we help protect and commercialize your intellectual property or IP. So who we are and what we do. As you can see, that picture captures this team that exists, and the backdrop is the Bill L. Harbert Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Essentially, we are the Technology Transfer Office of UAB. And the Bill L. Harbert Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, or HIIE, is the DBA, or Doing Business As. So it is the umbrella organization, which is the named organization. And UAB Research Foundation is the legal entity under which we operate. So to the extent that this slide helps clear confusion, I'm very happy if it creates more confusion. The bottom line is anything to do with technology transfer or Bill L. Harbert or UAB Research Foundation is all us. That's the bottom line of the slide. Okay, so why we exist? So we protect IP, and more about what IP is, and that's kind of the second part of the presentation, and identify suitable partners to bring technology to the marketplace. So that's exactly why we exist. And we also help guide budding scientist entrepreneurs through the startup formation process. So those are the two primary reasons we exist. And what is it that we do? So if scientists like you or staff or any other person at UAB has inventions, and what inventions are going to be elucidated later on, we evaluate, develop, help connect, patent, market, startups, all of those kinds of things. And eventually the bottom line is we try to help get your inventions into the hands of a commercial partner so that it can be developed for the public good. how we do it. And this is an important slide. So the first 4 points are 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the first two are what you do, which is your research and your discoveries will lead to something called IP. And if there is IP, then you would disclose it to us. If you think there is IP, please disclose it to us. We're happy to talk. So please don't not disclose it to us. And then it's assigned to a person called a licensing associate. And then steps 5, 6, 7, and 8 is a very iterative, interactive process wherein we do commercialization analysis. We make decisions on whether this IP needs to be protected in some way, shape, or form, and more on that a little later. And then we use that information to, as it says in below 7, have discussions and protection strategies. And then once we make that decision, we market it, or if it's relevant, help in the creation of a startup. Again, as I said, steps 5 to 8 is an iterative process that we do in conjunction with the inventor of the technology. And then once we identify the appropriate partner to whom we will license it, we negotiate the license. And of course, it then gives rise to revenue, which we distribute according to our patent distribution policy. So going back to point number 5, the commercialization analysis, below that you can see in small print something called Fellows Report. So when I started here at UAB, not that it was my brainchild, but I certainly brought it into UAB for the first time. It's something called the Innovate Fellows Program. So what the Innovate Fellows Program is that it taps into the very talented pool of our graduate students and postdocs, and we call them Innovate Fellows. And we train them so that they can help perform market and prior art analyses. What is prior art? If you have a question, I'm happy to answer. So anything which exists before this invention came to be or disclosed to our office, which precedes that invention, is called prior art. And that may be an important consideration as we evaluate the likely impact of commercialization of this particular intellectual property. And again, the assessment, as the third bullet point there suggests, it identifies not only the competition, it also identifies potential partners with whom we can engage to see if they would like to take on this IP to help it become a product. And as far as marketing goes, we use social media, web presence, conferences. There's a tool called Flintbox, and we are extremely dependent in addition to your connections, your Ph.D. mentor or your postdoc mentor or somebody who might have graduated from your lab may well have gone to industry and may be holding good connections or positions in different areas that we would love to leverage, because that warm introduction, because you're the expert, we are never going to be the expert as much as you. So if something comes from you, it's going to have instant credibility. So we certainly would love to leverage your connections to make that initial warm introduction so that we can take it from there and then do the legal part of negotiation and getting the agreement in place. And as it says in the starred part of the slide, we are always recruiting fellows. So this Innovate Fellows program, as I said, draws from the graduate student and postdoc population at UAB. The time commitment on a weekly basis is 10 hours. We don't need them to come anywhere into our offices. It can all be done remote. They do get paid for this as well. Of course, we will never engage any grad student or postdoc without their mentor agreeing to it and kind of taking it on. But it provides an opportunity for the grad students and postdocs to kind of explore areas outside of academia, given that likely 90% of grad students or postdocs will not end up in an academic career. This provides an opportunity for them to get their feet wet into something which is slightly different, while still utilizing their core strength and skills as a scientist. So any questions about any of those? Right? If not, I'll move on. So this comes then to the main subject matter and the topic of this seminar, which is what is IP or intellectual property and why it matters to you. And the objectives that I hope to be able to convey is to be able to recognize IP when you see it, understand how IP is commercially relevant, make no mistake, or please understand that there may be a phenomenal paper that you might publish in Nature or Cell or Science, but that does not necessarily mean that automatically that has commercial value. It is profoundly important. That's why it's published in such a great journal, but it may or may not have immediate commercial traction. And how IP can bring value to the organization is also something that I'll be touching on. So what constitutes an invention? And if you can look at this word cloud, there is know-how, patents, research tools, copyright, software, devices, ML, AI, all of these kinds of things are what constitutes an invention. And so I want to make sure that you don't think about inventions in a very narrow way as only things that can be patented. There are all of these other things that are not really inventions, but they also have commercial value. And specifically, I might like to point out research tools. These are unique reagents that have commercial value. For example, mice that you may, genetically engineered mice that you may generate just in the course of your studies to do what you want to do, cell lines that you might have developed, or antibodies that you might have generated to be able to identify or see if your particular protein of interest is expressed in a cell or in a tissue, or it's been knocked down. All of these things are routinely done in your laboratories. And all of these things have tremendous commercial value. In fact, the largest volume of licenses that we do are indeed these research tools. And these research tools do not need to be protected by a patent for them to have this commercial value. And how they gain their coolness or the value that they gain is primarily because you published them in a fantastic journal. And then other people want to use that mouse that you published, or that antibody, or that cell line that you developed in their research. And especially if it's a company, then they'll pay us good money to kind of take it on. And this is important because obviously with modern biotechnology, it is fairly trivial and not very expensive to create a genetically engineered mouse. But that particular mouse that you made has the cachet of having been peer reviewed. And so people want to identify themselves with that mouse. So even though they can obviously make the exact same mouse likely using genetic engineering tools, they will still pay us good money to get that mouse or that antibody. So that's what gives it its value. Okay, now protecting IP. So if you think of the words intellectual and property, and you kind of split them up, let's look at the second word first, which is property. Now, property, if you look at in the physical realm of the world we live today, you can consider this picture below as property. That's just land that let's say you own. And how will you protect it, right? So when you have land like this, typically it's protected by putting up a fence. So this fence helps delineate or demarcate your property from that of your neighbors. And you would also, in this physical property, sometimes post signs which says private property, please keep out. So this is for a physical property where you can actually put signs, where you can actually put a fence. But what about intellectual property? Intellectual property is something in your head, something that you invented. So how do you ensure that other people know that you have indeed created this valuable intellectual property, that you need to protect it with some kind of a fence, and you need to let somebody else know that it is your property, please keep out. So given that there are 4 different kinds of intellectual property, and these columns, which are highlighted as trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and patents, are the ways or the signage that you would see, and the marks below them, the TMSMR, the Circle C, and the patent pending, and those kinds of marks. Those are essentially the signages that are used when somebody wants to convey to the world that this is intellectual property that has been protected. That's the correlation between those two. Now, the rest of the talk, or most of the rest of the talk, is going to be on these specific 4 different columns and kind of detailing trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and patents. to kind of explore how you might be generating those and how and when and why you should be talking to us about them. Excuse me. So if this was a live forum seminar, I would have requested a show of hands to ask if everybody recognizes these two pieces of candy, and of course everybody likely would have. And they are to the left Toblerone, which is trademarked by its very specific kind of shape, as well as the Hershey's Kisses, right? It's a very unique shape. It is instantly recognizable. And these are other kinds of marks, which are the Just Do It by Nike, the McDonald's, and the Coca-Cola. These are all very, very, very common examples and identifiable examples of what is a trademark. And the purpose of these trademarks is that it distinguishes, and that's the key word, it makes it unique, a product or a good or a service, right? So since Toblerone and that particular triangular shaped chocolate is trademarked, nobody in the world ought to be able to make another candy exactly shaped like that. In fact, Toblerone will come and sue you. They have trademarked that shape of chocolate. Hershey's Kisses has trademarked that shape of chocolate. And so that is a distinguishing characteristic of that product, which gives it its value and gives it its recognition and gives it its brand, which connotes to the value. And that is worth a lot of money. And if you were to look at the total number of kinds of trademarks you can get, there are 34 classes of goods and 11 classes of services that one can get a trademark in. So essentially, there are 45 different kinds of trademarks. And if that sounds a little confusing and not very clear, it'll hopefully become clear in the next couple of slides. What one needs to do is, if you have made a unique shape like a Toblerone or a Hershey's Kisses, for example, you would need to register that shape with the United States, in the US anyway, the USPT, or the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And the last line there, which is you have to monitor it against dilution. What that means is that if somebody else is making a chocolate bar which looks like a Toblerone, you have to make sure that they are prevented from doing that by suing them. That way you're enforcing your trademark on them. So just a couple of interesting case studies, and for most of these things, I'm going to have some case studies which are illustrating the point, as well as trying to make some example or share some examples of these kinds of things from within UAB. So this Prepare is a trademark, and it was a mom and pop entity. Essentially, it was a recipe and meal planning app. And they had this shape of a pear, and they were just trying to be cute. They called it Prepare, and they had this shape of a pear. For some reason, Apple thought that the shape of that pear looked very, very similar, and people would get confused between the shape of that pear and their Apple iconic trademark. And so they sued this company, this mom and pop shop, and they made them change the shape of their leaf. So it kind of points down. And for Apple, this downward turning leaf with that sharp angle there was adequately different and distinguishing from Apple's so as to not lead to any confusion, and they let it go. So what might seem trivial and silly to us was very important for Apple, enough for them to enforce their rights to that trademark, and they actually won. So this example, Golden Week, is an example which maybe illustrates very clearly what those 45 different classes of trademark really mean. So I'm going to share two examples of the exact same trademark, but used for completely different things. So in the one instance, the Golden Week trademark was trademarked by an orthopedic group. I think this is out of Texas. And they were essentially an emergency medical response service medical services and things like that. So they trademarked the word Golden Week for those kinds of classes. And on the right, red in the red print, was a securities brokerage firm that also had that exact same two words. So again, the same two words can be trademarked for two completely different purposes. And that doesn't lead to confusion because the clientele for these two are unlikely to overlap. And this exact two words were also in-house, inside UAB, trademarked by our own Dr. Vivek Lal. And he is a pulmonologist by training, especially a pediatric pulmonologist. And when preemies are born, the first week of their care is very critical because their lungs are not developed. And that specific care that needs to be given to those preemies was actually just written down by him. It was not necessarily anything novel, but he took the time to write it down and essentially make it a protocol. And he got this Golden Week trademark issued for medical use instructional and training material. And we have the opportunity now, if some other hospital entity, for example, doesn't want to reinvent the set of instructions, they can ask us for the license to use them, and we would license it to them. So this word cloud, art, books, architectural works, movies, pictures, sound, theatrical works, they are all examples, obviously, of what we know as copyrights. So the purpose of a copyright is the right given to the owner of the copyright to reproduce, derive, distribute, and perform. So all of those four words make absolutely great sense for music and picture and theater and drama and things like that, and books, for example. and obviously that gives rise to a lot of money to the copyright holder or the author or the publisher, as the case might be in some cases. And the characteristics of a copyright are that it is the life of the author or the owner, a life of the author plus 70 years, or the time when it was first introduced into the public realm, and 95 years after that. Copyright does not need any kind of registration, unlike a trademark. As soon as you put something down, as soon as you write a set of unique words or a poem or a book, as long as it's unique and not plagiarized, by definition, it's already copyrighted. So the protection is automatic, the right is automatically granted. And copyrights are enforced in some ways very similar to a trademark, in that let's use Disney in two different ways as an example. And so I guess many of you have grown up and probably participated in plays in schools, or maybe your kids have participated in plays in schools. And several times, some of the plays that they put on in school shows are derived from the Disney world of movies and the kid version of that. And even schools, when they have to perform this play or have to put this play up, they have to get a license and a very specific script from Disney, which they have to use word for word without modification. Any modification is not allowed. And that's how Disney enforces its copyright. And taking the Disney analogy in a different direction, the first example of Mickey Mouse being seen by the rest of the world was in 1929. And that particular cartoon was Steamboat Willie, if you all remember that. And 1929, and remember, sorry, actually, I did not mention that. Maybe I did mention it. If something was put up by a corporation and not by a specific author, then it lasts for 95 years, the copyright. So Steamboat Willie first came out in 1929, which means in 2024, it would be 95 years. And after that, anybody can perform, reproduce, derive, or distribute Steamboat Willie, and Disney cannot come after you. And here is a very interesting example of what happens when copyrights expire. So everybody remembers Winnie the Pooh, of course, a very charming, kid-friendly book. Copyright expired. Look what they did to it. They made it into a horror movie, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. So this is what can happen. Copyrights expire, but there's nothing anybody can do about it. So again, a case study from close to home. So at the time of COVID, the UAB Center for Palliative and Supportive Care decided to come up with this kind of a questionnaire because, as you know, in the early days of COVID, the fear was that people who are in nursing homes and old age care facilities, they obviously had a very high risk of contracting COVID and succumbing to it. And so their loved ones were unable to meet them. And the people who were supporting them, the nurses, the doctors, etc., they wanted to make sure that the patient's mental health is in a good space. And so they thought that if they could make their interaction with their patient a little more personal and personalized, it would engage them in a better way and make them feel like they are recognized as a human being and as a person, as opposed to somebody who's in room number 5. And so they developed a simple questionnaire where they asked, what does your patient like to be referred as? Let's say the person's name is Robert. Is he prefer to be called Robert, Robbie, Bobby, Bob, whatever? What do they enjoy? Do they like the New York Times puzzle or crossword or something like that? So that way, engaging them in things that the family knows that they enjoy would make them feel more comfortable. Now, this is a very simple, useful, copyrighted, licensed revenue generator. Revenue is not much, but the most important thing here is this provides the opportunity for creating value to the organization. In this case, both UAB as well as the Center for Palliative and Supportive Care. And that is exemplified by this next slide, because this is exactly the same Meet My Loved One, the same questionnaire in a slightly different color scheme, which we allowed and authorized to use by the Northern Mississippi Medical Center. And where it brings value to the organization, if you can see my cursor, is it says extremely at the bottom, used with permission from UAB Center for Palliative and Supportive Care. So somebody in Northern Mississippi Medical Center is using this, but they have to use this form with this note, which brings credibility to the people who invented or created this copyright. So that again now ends the copyright part of it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. If not, I'm going to jump ahead. All right. So WD-40, KFC, New York Times bestseller list, Google search algorithm, Coca-Cola formula, and that last one's probably the giveaway. These are all examples of trade secrets. And the purpose of a trade secret is that, as it says below there, it derives its value primarily because of the secrecy associated with it. So as long as the Coca-Cola formula is secret, it's got value. If the Coca-Cola formula now becomes generally and broadly available, then the sales of Coca-Cola will drop because everybody else can make their own Coke. Similarly with KFC, the 11 Spice blend. What was interesting for me in this list was the New York Times bestseller list. So the bestseller list for the New York Times is compiled or comprised not necessarily only because it sells the most, a book or the most watched movie or whatever, but it has a multifactorial analysis that goes into what makes something come on the New York Times bestseller list. And that algorithm and those set of parameters are a very closely guarded secret by New York Times, because they don't want anybody to game the system to kind of make them get on that list, because that provides tremendous validation and value to that person. So they keep it a secret. And as it says in the characteristics, as long as it's a secret, it's going to have tremendous value. And the secret is also important because it is what is also held in secret is the last two words, negative information. So let's look at WD-40. For people who don't know what WD-40 is, it's essentially a lubricant. And since it's called WD-40, I'm making the presumption, I could be wrong, but I'm making the presumption that there was WD-1 to 39 that probably did not work very well. And 40 did. So 1 to 39 are essentially blind alleys, and time, effort, money spent trying to develop the perfect lubricant until they hit on 40. And so they have no incentive to tell the world that experiments 1 to 39 did not work, because WD-40 is a trade secret. And that means that somebody else who wants to duplicate WD-40 has to go through the same process of maybe not 39 experiments, but maybe 100 experiments to figure out the exact formulation. They may come up with something better, or they may never get it. So negative information is also a part of trade secret that is as important as the information. That ends the trade secret thing. I don't have an example because it's a secret. I can't tell you. All right. So again, if this was a live audience, I would have asked the question and asked for a show of hands. Are monopolies a good thing? And I hope and I expect that most people would say that monopolies are not a good thing, because they don't bring good value for the customer. And having said that, what does a patent really allow you to do? A patent essentially is a limited monopoly. If you look at the note there, that is granted in return for revealing how to, in that sense, it's a significant contrast from a trade secret. So remember the 39 experiments that had to be done before you got to WD-40. And a patent is the reverse of that. Governments of the world all over, of countries the world all over, they grant a limited monopoly for a very limited period of time to a person who has invented something which is patentable, in return for them revealing how to. So they have to tell you exactly how they got to WD-40. And so that resources, time, effort, money are not spent in trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. The governments grant those people a limited monopoly. But what is it that a patent actually allows you to do? A patent actually allows you to do nothing. A patent is essentially a negative right. And all it does, it allows you to exclude other people from making, using, or selling the invention. Now that is clearly confusing, and I'm hoping to illustrate that with the next set of examples. So what does a patent actually allow you to do if it's a negative right? So let's kind of think about a world which did not have buckets. So the only way you could transfer water from one place to another was to cup your hands and transfer it. And then somebody came up with this idea of a plastic container which has a lip, and they called it a bucket. And this, of course, allowed you to use both your hands, put your fingers below the lip, and carry a far vast quantity of water than would otherwise have been possible. Of course, that is less than optimally efficient. So somebody came up with the genius idea that you can actually make a handle that inserts itself into the groove that you had made for your fingers. And this now allows you to double your effort, so you can carry a bucket in each hand. However, with the presumption that the bucket and the handle are independently patentable, nobody can make a bucket with a handle until and unless you strike a deal with the person who owns the handle and the person who owns the bucket, so that you have the right from both those entities to make a bucket with a handle. Or it could be one of the entities getting the right from the other. It doesn't have to be a third party. However, there are clearly buckets such as these which may not infringe that particular patent or those sets of patents because they are different. And then, of course, you have water, but water might spill or evaporate from this bucket. So somebody said, let's just put a flat cover on this and let's call it a lid. And then lids can slide off. So let's make lids that snap on. That could be a patent. Lids that screw on, that could be another patent. And then, of course, now it's a big pain to remove this lid and get the water. So let's have a lid that has a spout, so the water can be poured while the lid is still on. And then the shape of the spout, a cap for the spout, caps that snap on, caps that screw on. So it goes on and on and on. And essentially, you may have to get, for the last iteration of this, a license from every other single patent holder from the preceding invention, so that you can make a bucket with a lid that screws on, that has a spout, that has a cap that snaps on. So those are the number of patents that you need to license, so that you have something called freedom to operate. So in any field, as it says, as it kind of illustrates, patent protection is increasingly detailed, and multiple licenses may be required for what's called freedom to operate, for you to actually make something. And most novel, non-obvious ideas can be patented. And the question is, as I said in the very beginning, is it useful or commercially relevant? And of course, I would love for you to engage with folks from our office who are the licensing experts at UAB. So now that we covered the 4 different kinds of intellectual property, and I was remiss in not including software, and software is also a very important kind of intellectual property that can and should be protected. So if you all have developed any kind of software code that you're using and you think it's novel, please share that with us as well. So a quick primer on licensing. So going back to the concept of property. So you have this property and you're the owner of this property. And then somebody asks you for grazing rights to that property. And essentially you license that grazing right to graze their sheep on your property. So in the intellectual world, we can give licensing rights to patents, software, data, research tools, know-how, materials, clinical samples, all kinds of things. All of those things can be licensed. And there are different kinds of licenses: exclusive, non-exclusive, data use, software, etc. And the terms in a license typically have these characteristics. There are financial terms. How much is it gonna cost you to allow you to graze your sheep? Non-financial terms: how many months in a year can they do it? Okay, sorry, let me give another non-financial term. So a non-financial term can be that I'll let you graze your sheep, but you have to ensure that if your sheep poops in this yard, you have to take it out and store it away somewhere else. Duration could be you're given this right for a year. The scope is you probably have 100 square meters in which your sheep can graze. Representations come from both sides. The person who has the sheep represents that's only going to be their sheep and not somebody else's. You represent it's your land. You have the license to give it to them. And many times these things end in disputes. So you already envisage how you're going to resolve this dispute. Are you going to just talk to each other like adults? Are you going to get somebody to mediate your dispute? Are you going to go sue each other? All those things are decided upfront in a license. Those are the terms of the high-level terms of what you see in a license. So coming back to UAB again, our office specifically, we have received last fiscal year, 105 intellectual property disclosures. That number needs to increase. And obviously, I'd love to get intellectual property disclosures from all of you. We have been successful in negotiating 39 different licenses. I think the final number is about 40 or 41. Several patents have been issued. Many applications have been filed. We've launched 4 startups. Several more are going to be starting up probably in the next 2 quarters. We generated $5.58 million in revenue. And through our fellows, we generated 53 reports and we have had 54 marketing campaigns. I think that's probably the last slide. That's my contact information. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Please feel free to unmute and ask directly.
Hi, Karthik. This is Aftab. As always, a very nice presentation and very informative one. I have a question as so can drugs be pharmaceutical compounds be filed as a trade secret?
No.
And why not?
Because the FDA needs to know what you're giving somebody. It needs to go through an approval process, and you can't give them something which the FDA does not know. It's a regulated product, and so no, it can't be a trade secret now.
So the reason why I was asking is because of the example you gave for Coca-Cola, which is something that we take in.
Yes.
So how can that be a trade secret if the ingredients are not known?
Great point. Coca-Cola existed before the FDA came into existence. So there are a lot of things which are grandfathered into these things. So for example, there are a lot of food colorings and dyes, which if they were to go to the FDA today, they may have a really hard time, or they may have to go through a lot of hoops before they can be allowed to be used as colorants, even in food. But since they've been used for decades before FDA came into existence, and they have been, they're called GRAS compounds, that is GRAS, generally regarded as safe.
Yeah.
They have been grandfathered into things which people can use. If you want to try to get a new colorant into the market, good luck. You'll have to jump through hoops almost as much as trying to get a drug into the market, because they'll go through toxicity testing, all kinds of different testing before they'll allow you to do that.
Mhm. I have another question. It's about the research tools that you mentioned.
Yes.
Normally, when you make a research tool, often you get something or buy something from a company
Right.
that can be used for. So how does that work in terms of protecting or marketing that research tool?
So let's take an example of an antibody that you might buy from New England Biolabs, for example.
Mhm.
And where does New England Biolabs get it from? They get it from somebody who actually made it. And that somebody who made it is probably somebody in some university. So the university has granted, some university has granted New England Biolabs the right to make and sell that antibody, so that researchers like you can get it from New England Biolabs. It's a one-stop shop. They can ensure about quality and things like that, as opposed to going back to the original source of the inventor in whatever university they were, to be able to procure it, which might have some quality issues because that's not their job. They just made the antibody for whatever research they did and they moved on. That's not the job for them to supply to you. So it's easy to have a third party licensed to supply to you, and the university gets royalties from the sale to you because their inventor invented it. And in fact, antibodies are a good example because we have a lot of antibodies that were generated here at UAB, thanks to the pioneering efforts of Dr. John Carney and Max, I can't blank on his last name. So they generated so many antibodies that they are really sought after. And so we get a lot of licensing revenue from the sale of those antibodies.
I have a question. Oh,
Sure.
okay. I work with researchers. I'm just a program manager, but I have different researchers who have developed, one has developed a new way of teaching students. And I'm trying to figure out at what point in time I need to refer them to your office. I have one who's already done the preliminary pilot studies and one who is developing an app for some acceptance and commitment therapy and occupational therapy. But she's collaborating with University of Alabama. And I'm just trying to get her to at least establish a collaboration agreement with them at the early stages for when it gets later, in case they do end up having an app that is wonderful, you know,
Yes,
they want to do, and everybody at least knows who owned what, I guess.
absolutely. No,
What stage do I refer them to you or to your department?
The earlier the better, because what you told me in a snippet is not adequate information for me to know what the right time is. But let me kind of give you a sense of how I would approach it and how I would think about it. So it's best to inform us early, so that just like you anticipated that it's better to have some kind of a formal agreement between UAB and Alabama now, so that it's clear who invented what, so that we can apportion the rights fairly and reasonably now, before there's any money on the table, right? We'll always get greedy when there's money on the table. So let's do it now. And to your point about when should they engage with our office, I think if I don't know the stage of development, but I would say when it has a proof of concept where people have actually used it and have shown that it actually works.
Okay.
That's one thing. And second, if they believe, in their opinion, that not only does it work well, hey, look at these examples and look at our cool paper, but that may still not be enough for us to be successful in licensing it.
Right.
And I'll tell you why. Let me explain it. Because you've shown it, but then you publish it. And once you publish it, that's when the world knows, oh, this is really cool. I want to use it. And then people from, say, Huntsville or Duke or Georgia Tech somewhere start asking your inventors, can we have this software, please? Can we have this tool, please? And that's when we can say, now we have an opportunity, especially if we want to give a site license to the entire university. I'm just making something up now. We can, of course, license that to all of Georgia Tech or all of Duke to be able to use that, because that is the, as I said, your connections and your peer-reviewed publications are what gives that invention its coolness, because people trust you, the expert. Nobody's going to listen to me because I'm not an expert in anything, right? They are the experts, and they will, their credibility and credentialing will essentially make that valuable. And we might try to market it, but our success rate would be low, and it'll become exponentially higher once it gets publicized, in this case, and then people want to have it. Now, that's slightly different from the example that Aftab was kind of alluding to, which is in the case of a drug. In the case of a drug, we certainly want to protect it by some kind of a patent before, if this is the drug, we want to protect it before it gets published or publicized. Otherwise, we lose our ability to be able to patent it. Actually, I did not cover that in my slides, and I think that slide got left out by mistake. So it's very, 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 very important for any, if you think you have IP, please, 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 please talk to us before you publish it. And publishing doesn't mean publishing it in a journal. Publishing also means putting it in a poster, in an abstract, in a talk that you might give, PowerPoint conversation, anything that makes it available, that information available to the public is a public disclosure. And that precludes or reduces our ability to patent it. And therefore we get less value for it. So I'm so terribly sorry that that slide somehow got left out. It probably is one of the most important slides. And I was doing a lot of changing to my slides and I missed that, but super important, which is different for software, for example. Software, as I said, it's a copyright. And by the fact that you've actually written it down, it's automatically protected. Not true for a drug. That needs to be protected. Did that answer your question, Donna?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
We have any other questions?
Thank you, Karthik.
You're very welcome.
Everybody likes your lecture and everybody appreciates hearing you all the time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I don't see any
Thanks,
other
Lisa.
questions. So I want to thank you again, Karthik, for presenting to our group. And thank you to all of you who attended today. Please stay tuned to our website to learn more about additional grand rounds that we will be hosting. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
Thank you.